Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting. And I think Jack LaLanne answered that question for us through the course of his lifetime. People don't know that Jack LaLanne was also a chiropractor, but there was so much professional bigotry at the time, he couldn't talk about chiropractic at all. But he got the whole show started about exercise, nutrition, supplementation. And he's a perfect example. When he was 80 years old or 75, he swam across San Francisco Bay, towing 2 rowboats filled with people. I mean, nobody's ever done that before, since, regardless of their age. And so I've always lived in the mantra that it has nothing to do with age. It has to do with the quality of the experience. And, you know, I've gotten back into some serious training myself, and I've broken records. I've been an athlete my whole life, but I've broken records at my age now that I couldn't have broken when I was a young man, just to prove a point to myself. You know, the research that's happening right now in genetics shows that the telomeres that shorten, that determine our lifespan, can also grow. That there are enzymes that make them grow, so we can forestall the aging process if we do a lot of the right things. And so as far as age having anything to do with your health or well-being, it's not your age, it's what you've done with those years. Yeah. And just like in genetics, you know, we want to blame the genetic code on everything. There's a couple really interesting things that have happened with the genetic code that people don't necessarily haven't heard about, because it doesn't sell insofar as the context that we're being sold. You know, if you look at the stem cell research that's being done, and it's been done now for almost 40 years, what they found out 40 years ago was that you could take the exact same cells and put them in different mediums, and they turn into different things. If you put it in one medium, it'll turn into a protein that makes muscle. If you put it in another medium, it turns into cartilage, or it'll turn into heart muscle. That caused a researcher by the name of Bruce Lipton, PhD, to do some research further on the genetic code and how much of an influence it really has on our lives. He's the first guy to pull the nucleus out of a cell. He was nominated for a Nobel Prize in the work that he did. He wanted to find out how long cells would live if they didn't have a nucleus in them anymore. You know what he found out? They don't die. They keep on functioning normally until they need new parts. And so when they were doing the coding, we used to hear a lot about the code they were mapping. You don't hear much about that anymore for a couple of reasons. We have about 140,000 different proteins as human beings that make up our bodies. And so according to the genetic determinist theory that we're being sold through the media and through the pharmaceutical industry, we need to have 140,000 different genes, one per protein. You know what they found out in doing this research? We have the same number of genes as an earthworm, about 20,000. So it isn't the genes that control anything. In fact, when they were doing this research and studying the DNA strand, they found all this extra protein in the nucleus. They called it junk protein. They didn't know why it was there. They just threw it away. Well, you know what we found out? It's the junk protein that tells the DNA what to produce. In other words, you have a cell membrane. The cell membrane gets an impulse from the environment. And based on that impulse from the environment, it sends a specific protein into the nucleus. And then that specific protein turns the page of the DNA to the right page that has the blueprints for the protein that it needs to make. So the DNA is nothing but a book of blueprints, and it doesn't do anything. And if you think about it in terms of common sense, this whole concept of genetic determinism is nonsense, like breast cancer. If it was just a gene, then you would be born with breast cancer, because we know that genes don't self-actualize. They don't just wake up all of a sudden. And so when you really start to look at things and apply common sense, the research doesn't bear it out. And that's why I've come back into practice, is to help people understand, because people are being asked these questions. You know, thank God that we have the internet, and thank God that it's still free, because it's the questions. The right answer to the wrong question doesn't benefit anybody. The right question, even with the wrong answer, begins to move us in the correct direction. And now we're beginning to ask the right questions.